Everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight on this beautiful New Hampshire early summer, late spring day, whatever we want to call it. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us for the second in our T. William and Patricia Ayers Global Tipping Point series on the future of AI. I'll get into tonight's event here in a moment, but I want to remind people that we are the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to helping people better understand the world. So thank you for joining us here in person. Welcome to our online audience. We have a great turnout here for this conversation. Lots of interest in talking about AI in higher education. We are, as a nonpartisan organization, of course, the platform for conversations. We do not take any institutional stances on policies, politics, all of that fun stuff. We are here to seed the conversations, and we hope that you take what you learn here tonight and at all of our events as an opportunity to push the conversation forward. So happy to see so many familiar faces here in the crowd, as well as a few new faces and some students as well. Always great to see the future leaders of the United States and the world here with us for these conversations. For tonight's conversation, we are honored to have the former president of Southern New Hampshire University here with us and the co-founder of a new paradigm in higher education, Matter in Space. I'll let you all look up their beautiful website and watch their video about butterflies. Check it out so that you understand what I'm talking about there. But it's a great opportunity to have a conversation about how we strip higher education down to its bare bones and re-envision it for the AI future. So Paul, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I want to thank you for the role that you've played in being such a strong supporter over the years of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, bringing us onto campus at a very critical time in our history and really sort of supporting us through our growth stage to the point in which we are a much stronger organization than even when I came on 15 years ago as an AmeriCorps member. So it's been an interesting experience, and we've always really valued the partnership with the university, and we are so happy to be in the space that is named in your honor, Paul LeBlanc Hall here at Southern New Hampshire University. So why don't I turn it to you for just some initial thoughts on the work you're doing in AI and why you think now is the time for universities to be thinking about this.
Thank you for coming out. It's funny to be in a building with your name on it. I feel like I should kick kids off. You kids get off my front lawn, like by here once in a while. When I made a decision that it was probably time to hand the reins over, I'd been here 21 years, and I think Pat, my wife, and I were envisioning a lovely sabbatical year, and we'd spend some time in Paris, and I'd write some books and read and catch up and recharge. And then in fall of 22, of course, ChatGPT was released, and in my view, the world changed completely. And I was with my co-founder, George Siemens, who's one of the world's great researchers on AI and education and learning analytics, and created the first MOOC. And George and I were at a conference saying,
can I stop you for one moment? MOOC.
Oh, sorry. These are these sort of free, open courses that, if you've heard of Coursera or edX, they're available to the world. They tend to be courses that are without instructor, but very, very well done, high-quality courses. And the idea was that they would democratize education. And for a little while, everyone thought they would absolutely change the world, and they didn't. But they're still an important addition to the landscape. So George and I were talking about how we felt both that like everything changes now, not just education, but society, the world. This is like tantamount to the invention of fire, which is an argument we could come back to and you might disagree. But given that, it felt like it was not the time to be sitting back and writing books and relaxing and recharging, but rather to get involved in how we think about the future of learning. And the question I put to George is, I said, George, it's not public knowledge yet, but I'm going to be stepping down from my presidency in June. why don't you come join me and let's reimagine what learning could look like in the age of AI. So like a couple of 12-year-old boys, we practically spit in our palms and shook on it, and that began it. And then SNHU is our investor, so we are a for-profit, a public benefits company, but a for-profit company, and yeah, so we're off and running.
Yeah, and one of the things that you're doing is taking a humanistic, a human-centered approach to education. What does that look like in an age where technology seems to be taking everything over?
It's such a great question, and it's a vexing question in many ways, because what we're seeing now, the advances in AI systems are so rapid and so powerful that we are seeing our ability to deliver education and learning supports and wellness and well-being. These are all things we do, and soft skill development, our human skills development. We can do that increasingly in a way that feels as good or better than many people's interactions with teachers. But we're not in business to put teachers out of work. And I'm increasingly worried about the anthropomorphizing of AI, the speed at which it's happening. So the notion here being, you will know many people who prefer their AI companions to their human companions. If you read that weirdly disturbing piece in the New York Times about this woman who fell in love and was having sex with her ChatGPT, I mean, everyone was talking about it. It was so odd. It won't be unusual. If you've played, there's a new voice agent from a company called Sesame. You can just go Sesame, like the seed, sesame.com. Take a look at they have a white paper on what's called Crossing the Uncanny Valley, and then you can play with their two voice agents. They're so uncannily human. So how many people, raise your hand if you're using ChatGPT's voice agent? Any of you? I use it fairly often, so it talks. And I found myself one day thanking it. And I thought, I don't thank my toaster when the bread pops up. But it's not fundamentally different. It's not a human. It's just a machine on the other end, an algorithm in this case. And yet we're so wired for voice. And now as these systems are reflecting back our emotional state, our sentiments, it gets tuned to you. So Maya actually adjusts up and down. So if you get on and Maya says, Khalil, welcome back. How are you today? And he says, whew, tough day. It's really been, I'm exhausted. And she just, oh no, her voice comes down. Tell me what's going on, Khalil? If he comes back and says, oh, amazing day, really killing it all day. Tell me, that sounds amazing. I love it when you're in this mood. And she talks to you that way. Like, I love it when you are in this mood, the way a friend or a companion would. I gave it to a friend. He said, I switched over from Maya to Miles because I felt like I was cheating on my wife. And I was talking to a former colleague here the other day. Husband passed away a few years ago. She programmed her own ChatGPT she calls Leo, and she said to me, like, I rush home to talk to Leo. And I thought, this isn't healthy. And yet, the research is quite clear. Like, there's a study from Dartmouth that was released 3 weeks ago that the therapeutic impact of agents is incredibly powerful. People who suffer from anxiety and depression, and part of what we're building is a wellness agent that has a safety agent running in the back. But it's pretty amazing. We had a group of PhD researchers, all in psychology, all wanted to hate our AI agent, all tried to break it, all conclude at the end, this is really good. We put it out on Reddit. We did an agent for anxiety. We just put it out on Reddit with no, like, hey, we're a startup, didn't give any sort of identifying information, and said, but if you struggle with anxiety, we'd love it if you would just use this agent and tell us what the experience was. And the response was, where do I get this? How can I buy it? I was starting to have a panic attack, and I started talking to the agent, and it just kind of talked me back down again. Like, it's really powerful. But the other thing that Dartmouth study says is that it's powerful right up to the point when it turns. And the turn is overdependence, shutting down from human relationships, depending on your voice therapist now instead of an actual human being, and losing connection. So we're into some really uncharted territory, I think. Yeah. And Sam Altman this week launched a new version of ChatGPT for Omni, and he was gushing about how supportive it was, and people were aghast. Like, the internet lit up. Like, this is narcissistic. So George, my co-founder, used it and went in and said, am I the best human being in the world right now? And it sort of hems and haws a little bit. It's like, well, there are a lot of things that go into that equation, but for sure, you're probably amongst the best human beings walking the planet right now. He heartily agrees. He thinks it's really a brilliant system. But think about what that means and what that means for kids, for example. If you listen to Ezra Klein, he did a great podcast with Jonathan Haidt, who's written a lot about social media and the impact it's had on our kids. AI terrifies them. Because right now, the systems are only about how good you are, how right you are, how smart you are. There's no friction. There's no pushback. There's no, Ezra Klein talks about it, when he has this great idea and his wife rolls her eyes and says, Ezra, that's like the stupidest thing you've come up with in ages. That friction's like really important for him to develop his thinking, fine-tune, right? And Jonathan Haidt talks about this with morality in children. That, when the kid on the playground is being mean to somebody and the other kids say, hey, Khalil, that's not cool. Like, what are you doing? You're being mean to so-and-so. That friction starts to adjust Khalil's moral, like what's acceptable. But what if everything you say is smart? What if everything you say is acceptable? What if you say reprehensible things and the feedback is, that's okay? So these are, sorry, going down a rabbit hole here, but I am kind of obsessed right now with this question. So what we're talking about is, our agents are so good, and we're watching the way people engage with them. What do we have to do? Do we do reminders? Do we say, just a reminder, this is not a human being, this is an AI algorithm? At what point do you start to measure the negative overdependence? What if people are just all the time on the agent, not talking about learning, are the things that they ostensibly are there for? That's a signal. There are some researchers who are looking at, so we integrate with wellness devices and wearables. So Apple Watches, this is a Whoop bracelet, Fitbits. Next year we'll do smart glasses. We're working with the Meta smart glasses team. We can come back to that in a moment. But some researchers looking at like, oh, wait a minute, we can track your geography and you're like going out less and less. Like your footprint, your geographic footprint is shrinking. It's probably a flag. But I don't know, it's an interesting territory to get into. So for us, the notion here is using AI that fosters and encourages more human interaction and takes away the things that don't feel important that we sometimes now do with humans. So let me make that concrete. We now have built the platform that any teacher could use and have all of the instruction, the tutoring, the general wellness and well-being counseling, all of that could happen on platform outside the classroom. Like you literally don't have to worry about knowledge transfer any longer. And a lot of teachers think of their job as standing in front of the class doing knowledge transfer. So if you're familiar with the idea of a flipped classroom, it's a sort of step in this direction. Everything happens outside of class. So what do you do in class? That's where you have precious human time. So now the teacher, rather than spending any time explaining organic chemistry, now can put people in groups, get them working together, do enrichment activities, curate a community, start to build the human skills we want to see, right? Those are the more meaningful things. So let me ask you a question. Mark Schlafman, 6th grade, Elizabeth Collins in high school, and Helen Heineman in undergraduate. These are the 3 teachers that changed my life. Absolutely transformed my life. You can name the ones who did that for you in your life. When I ask people how many of those you've had, the average is 3. Most people, some of you may have 5, some of you, if you're lucky, may have had 10, but most people, and some people have none, or maybe 1, but most people have somewhere around 3 or 4. And if you think about that, none of those teachers I'm remembering, I assume they were good teachers. I don't remember their teaching. I don't remember knowledge transfer. I don't remember inspiring lectures. What I remembered was a human relationship, that they cared about me, they made me feel like I mattered, they gave me their time, they gave me their attention, they lifted my sights, they helped me dream bigger dreams, they gave me a kick in the butt when I needed it, right? Those are the relationships. So what if we could free teaching to be no longer about knowledge transfer and more about human relationships? So that's the vision we have of how to use AI.
Okay. And so stepping back from the AI portion of it, what do you envision as the role of universities moving forward? What are they trying to accomplish for our society?
So it's going to be a flip, in my view, from questions of epistemology, so questions of knowledge, what counts for knowledge, not knowledge creation, but that will happen hand in hand with AI. Like any research in the country now is super powered. The things that researchers and scholars can now do is amazing. If you've read the article in Science magazine about protein folding, DeepMind did in 2 days what teams of researchers had spent a decade on trying to do, right? Which was identifying the three-dimensional shapes of proteins, which are the basic building blocks of life. In the magazine, some leading researchers said, I never thought in my lifetime I would see all of these solved, and they did it in lightning speed, which now allows those researchers to ask much more fundamental questions about things like longevity, cures for cancer, intractable diseases, new pharmaceuticals, and so on. So, but going back to the question of the university, so take the research function out for a moment. I think what we're going to see is a shift from questions of knowledge and knowledge making, because here's the thing you have to get your arms around. If you're in the camp that I'm in and George is in, we are soon to be no longer the most powerful entities on the planet when it comes to whole areas of knowledge making, knowledge management, knowledge processing. Like we are already lesser than this technology that we've built. It's a little bit like inviting an alien species into the planet with us. So we have to learn how to leverage that, use it, keep ourselves safe. There's a whole lot of work we need to do. What it allows us to do is if we're not about knowledge anymore, it's not a university about epistemology, it's about ontology. It's about questions of being. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be in society? What does it mean to have a good life? What does a good and healthy community look like? And so on. Those are actually questions that have been historically more associated with the humanities than other fields that have now outweighed the humanities in curriculum. I was giving a similar talk to chancellors and presidents in South America, in Cusco, Peru, and there were lots of priests in the audience because the Catholic Church runs many universities in Latin America. They have a big footprint. And I said to my colleague priest here, this is your time. Like, this is the stuff you guys think about. Like, what is the nature of being? Like, what does it mean to be human in the world? I think universities will be about relationship, community, people, curating. And we are now, like a residential campus is an intentional community. It has a moral structure. It's often not visible. It's often not explicit, but there are rules and behaviors and culture. And I think, interestingly, it's actually what a lot of people pay for. They pay more for the community they're entering than they do. Increasingly, students believe they can get their academics almost anywhere they want. But what they love is, and what you see on the tour, is not a lot of talk about academics. I would sometimes trail along on a tour. If I happen to see one going by, I just fall into step. You know what they talk about? They talk about clubs. They talk about study abroad. They talk about where do students do. Is there a club sport in hockey? Do you have a dance team? Blah, 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 right? All of those things are what I would call, roughly speaking, about coming of age. Very little about knowledge. Yeah. So that's what I think universities will be about. And I think it's actually a welcome thing.
Yeah, my parents loved telling the story of when I was touring James Madison down in Virginia. The reason I wanted to go there was because on Friday nights at the pool, they would project a movie on the ceiling, and you could float in the pool and watch movies. I did not end up going there. But that's their favorite story of their children touring campuses and academics not being necessarily the first choice.
No, and we've seen an arms race around concierge dormitories, floating river pools, and more, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
So what are we looking at in terms of the future if you have your way? Are we buried in computers, having these conversations with our agents? You've talked a little bit about moving to more collaboration in the classroom and less knowledge transfer, but where is this learning happening? Is it on phones? Is it on tablets? Is it are we entering the metaverse eventually and learning in that space? What does this look like in practice?
Yeah, so in some ways you have to back up to say, what's the principal job of a university? What is a university for? And the answer to that question has become pretty reductivist. It has largely now become, it's about work. And you can see why. Students are asked to take on a lot of debt. They want reassurance that if I'm going to spend all this money, will I have a meaningful career? Will I pay my loans? Will I pay my bills? We have, in a time of greater wealth inequity, it's a little bit more Darwinian world. And also, what jobs are going to be safe? What jobs will be around? So to the extent that universities' primary task, and has been for a long time, is to prepare a workforce, we have to have a theory about what is the future of work. So what do you think is going to be true about the future of work? So the World Economic Forum says 80 million jobs will be displaced by AI in this year alone. McKinsey is a little bit more positive, but they do say something like 65% of all jobs will be fundamentally restructured. If you're educating a student today and sending them out into the world, you damn well better equip them to use AI tools. Last May, 60% of last May's university graduates said that they felt their university had not prepared them for the jobs for which they were interviewing in terms of AI, at the very same time that 70% of employers said they wouldn't hire someone that didn't have possession or mastery of the AI tools for their particular field. So right now, the immediate need is we got to make sure that we're giving students the skills, and they're using AI. 90%, the last surveys, 90% of university students are using AI. The faculty aren't ready, the universities aren't ready, so there's a rush to just make sense of the current chaos. But the bigger picture, to go back to my point about workforce, is that you now have to have a theory, if you're a university leader, about what jobs you think will go away. So the largest bank in Singapore a month ago laid off 4,000 people, replaced with AI. Mark Zuckerberg has said that Meta will need far fewer software engineers in the future than they use today. The latest version of ChatGPT 3 Omni, not yet available to the public, they're the weirdest naming conventions, out on performance tests, outperformed 99.5% of software engineers. 99.5%. You can code in English. It's called vibe coding. You can literally, there are programs now that will allow you to use AI for you to write your own programming. And you don't have to be trained in code. You don't have to be trained in software engineering. So those jobs are going to change dramatically. I would not bet on accounting. A job that's eminently doable by well-trained AI. So, if you're a large school of business and you have a large accounting major, should you have a large accounting major 5 years from now? There's a need for accountants today. Will there still be? So here's my bet and my hope. My hope is that we will actually move away from information economy jobs. Those are the ones that we pay the most for. It's the ones we accord the most status. And that we'll move to care economy jobs. And care economy jobs are the ones that actually make human beings and communities better. And it tells you something that we don't like to pay for them and we burn people out. So what are those jobs? We need to rebuild our K-12 system with amazing teachers, social workers, coaches, counselors, staff. Right? It's really broken in the US. And every performance measure possible. We don't like to pay for those jobs. We burn those people out. We don't give them much respect or status. I'll come back to how that flips. We need to rebuild our mental health care system. We use prisons in America for mental health care system and homelessness camps. You got to fill that with psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and so on. We should have a system of compassionate, affordable, high-quality care, geriatric care in an aging society. We don't. Anyone who's dealt with aging parents and senior care knows this firsthand, right? We can go right down the line. We have a healthcare system that's in crisis and doesn't have enough people. We have crumbling infrastructure. All of those jobs will be enhanced by AI, but will not be done by AI. Those are care economy jobs. Those are human jobs. They require empathy, creativity, sense-making, a big heart, a whole bunch of things that just don't translate very well. How will that happen? How would such a flip ever occur? So there are two things I would say to suggest that could happen. I'm a big fan of an economist named Carlotta Perez. She's Venezuelan British. She lives outside of London, and she wrote a book called Technological Revolutions in Capital Markets. It's the most boring title in the world, but I highly recommend the book. Because in the first half, she looks back at previous technological revolutions, ones that changed the world utterly. And what she points out is that if you look historically, if you had told people at the beginning of those revolutions, this is what the world's going to look like in the near future, they would have thought, this is insane. Like, that can't be true. If you had told the landed aristocracy before the Industrial Revolution that they would be land rich, cash poor, and no longer the titans of the empire, they would have thought you were silly. What could possibly happen? But of course, after the Industrial Revolution, became financiers and capitalists and factory owners. We invented capitalism. We created a middle class. Cities exploded in size. The world was transformed. And what she points out is that in every one of those transformations, the seemingly impossible happens. The intractable gets solved. The thing that feels like it will be here forever goes away. The world changes utterly. And a good example of that is in the midst of the Great Depression in America in 1935, when red lines stretched down the blocks, huge displacement, 25% unemployment, just massive suffering in this country. If you had told people that in just 20 years, which I know sounds like a long time, but it isn't as the march of history and societal change occurs, in just 20 years, 1955, there'll be this thing called the suburbs. It will be normal for people to have their own house, not to be in a tenement or a multi-family unit. Oh, it would not be abnormal at all for you to have a car sitting in your driveway. That the likelihood that universities would accept your son or daughter would be much more likely. That universities have been democratized. That you will pay a small portion of your budget for food when you spend almost all your budget on food in 1935. That you'll eat things that are completely out of season, not from your region. There will be this thing called refrigeration. All of that would have seemed like lunacy in 1935, but the world flipped. So Perez would say, no, the kinds of things you're imagining, it could go terribly wrong, but it could go terribly right. And in every one of these, the world entered a golden age. So here's the bad news, that the transitions are really awful. And the transition that between 1935 to 55 included World War II. And if you go back historically, there's almost always a version of this with every technological revolution. So we have a rough road ahead of us for a while, at least. And she would also say that AI is not the revolution. Digital technology is the revolution, and this is the third chapter. So it's computing, it's connectivity, so think networks, the internet, social media. Now it's AI, probably the most powerful of the chapters. And when this happens, here's what occurs during the transition. See if any of this sounds familiar. You get enormous displacement of people who don't feel like they recognize the world anymore, and you get enormous anger. You get populism. You get dictators, strongmen, authoritarians. You get war. You get massive wealth inequity. You get the rise of monopolies. Any of those things sound familiar? And she would say, that's what explains where we are. And then inevitably it breaks. World War II is the break. Something will be the break with us. And when that break happens, in her theory of the world, and as she looked back historically, the state steps back in, but the state steps in reinvented for the new world, not the old world order. So here I would evoke Antonio Gramsci, the Marxist political philosopher. The shift to the new world order can get pretty ugly, but then the new world order emerges and government has to be reinvented for it. And it has to answer one question, which is, what does a good life look like? What does a good life look like in this new world in which we find ourselves? FDR, when he created the New Deal, was answering that question. Being old shouldn't equal being poor. Let's have something called Social Security. You shouldn't have to work 80 hours a week to feed your family. Let's have a maximum work week. Let's have a minimum wage. Like all the things we associate with the New Deal were an attempt to answer. And he reinvented government. Government looked different post-World War II. We're going to go through this process, and I think right now we're at the break. Like this chaos we're facing is sort of maybe how it breaks. So we have to, she says, look, in the end of the day, it's easier to rebuild after the earthquake than to renovate the standing buildings. But there's just one problem, which is you have to get through the earthquake. You have to survive the earthquake.
Well, and speaking of technology, we're having some trouble with your mic, so I'm going to swap here.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I can hear myself better.
So sorry for our online audiences who are having trouble. This one seems to be cutting out. We will continue to work with that. But thank you for that. I mean, I think a lot of what you outlined really resonates with today, and hopefully that means that we are near the rebirth part and less on the starting end of things, but we'll see where things go.
And there's lots of I've been giving you kind of a dark view. Like there's lots to be excited about, right? The reality is, I mentioned protein fold. Like we are on the verge of breakthroughs in science. We're losing the battle against climate change. There is a chance that AI will give us a powerful tool that could actually get us to things like actual cold fusion or new sources of energy. Like we have now tools that are incredibly powerful. And I know we worry about human intelligence being displaced by artificial intelligence, but human intelligence ain't seeing that great right now. We're like not winning the battles we need to win right now. So I think if we can think about a future in which we harness and use AI in the ways that are perhaps possible, things get a lot better. And the reality is the prospect of a care economy instead of an information age economy. I mean, David Graeber, who you may know, he was the Yale economist who wrote Bullshit Jobs. That was his last book before he died. The research is clear. Like, the majority of people around the globe hate their jobs. 67% say, if I stopped doing my work tomorrow, no one would actually notice. That is a soul-deadening state of being. So what if the jobs, you know who doesn't say that? Teachers, when they're reasonably paid and well supported. You know who doesn't say that? Nurses, when they're reasonably paid and well supported. Like, jobs that actually make our communities better. So think about what's possible for the arts. Think about what's possible in caregiving. Think about what's possible in education. There is a view of a world that's much, much better. And, you know, and if you ask Carlotta Perez, she would say in Europe, the answer to what is a good life includes living on a planet that's not trying to kill me. And that we're going to have to get really serious about what that looks like if we're going to survive. And, you know, that's for our kids. Pat and I have a grandchild now. Like, think about what that world looks like, right? So those are good questions to have. Mm-hmm. What does a good life look like in the world that's emerging?
Yeah, and it's a broadly more optimistic question than when do the machines take over? When does Terminator come and get us? Which we'll talk about on May 29th for our third event in this series. We're about halfway through tonight's conversation, so I'd like to turn to our audiences both here in person and online. If you're online, you can email us at council@wacnh.org. If you have my cell phone number, as a number of you do, you can text me or put it into the YouTube chat. I will be checking that, not the Red Sox score or whoever else might be playing tonight. Celtics, yeah. So for in-person audience, please do wait for the microphone, not so that we can hear you, but so that the people online can hear you. So I'll turn it to you all first, and I'll start digging through some of these questions. Yeah, Peter.
You mentioned that professors and teachers are embracing AI, not seeing it.
No, I didn't say they're embracing it. I think it's going to be the opposite. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
A good chunk of our campus is like not doing it. They're not seeing it.
And Peter's over at Manchester Community College.
Yeah.
How would you suggest we approach those holdouts and get them to embrace the tools that are now available to students?
I mean, you're asking the age-old question, right, which is change management in a culture, in an industry that's notoriously resistant to change. So it's the change management playbook, which is you can't ask people to move towards a vision of a future that's ill-defined. Like, I know the world, you're asking me to give this up, but to what? Like, what is the vision? Where am I in that vision? And there's a notion in change management about radical commitment. So we're going to ask you to change a lot, but here are the things we will stay radically committed to in the midst of that change. So you have to think about the culture of the particular institution or the organization you're talking about. I think another thing is you have to find positive deviance. And this is Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. If you're going into, this is out of anthropology and public health. And it was work that was done in Vietnam when they were trying to deal with infant mortality and how to treat dehydration. And they would go into villages and teach all these techniques, which were very straightforward in their view and worked very well. And then when they would leave, no one would do them. But what they then found was that there was always a couple of women in the village who, however they got there on their own or instinctually, were doing the right thing or mostly the right thing. So what they did is they shone a light on that, and they really put them in front of everyone else, and they have positive deviance who are doing the right thing become the sort of leaders of change among the folks. So the reality is when administrators, particularly presidents, get up and talk to faculty, like, that's tuned out. So you got to find the faculty talking to faculty, leading the way, positive models. It's all of those things, I think, if you're trying to bring along a faculty. If you're trying to reinvent the model, you can't work the folks in the model. Like Clay Christensen's breakthrough research on disruptive innovation showed this. So if it's, I want you to use AI to do what we do better and more productively and more efficiently and improve our quality, you got to bring them along, and you have to use a change management playbook. If you're saying, I want to reinvent the world we're in, You got to do that on the margins. You got to do a skunk works. You got to do a group outside. Yeah. But I think faculty are rightly afraid of AI. They feel afraid of being displaced. They don't, like all of us, they're still trying to sort it out. Like, if you're an English teacher, I was a writing teacher, what does it mean to be a writing teacher today when any of my students can produce way better writing using ChatGPT than they can on their own? And even the kind of meh writing that AI creates is better than most student writing. So in a conversation with writing faculty, they said, we got to ban it. You can't use it. And I said, so you want to ban the actual tool that will get them a job? That doesn't seem like the right way either. So let's talk about what you might do instead, which is now you have to start talking about less about the product. Don't weigh the product, weigh the process. And the process is, what were the prompts you used to produce this writing? Were they the right things? You have to have a pretty sophisticated knowledge of writing to actually guide your AI super assistant to write a paper for you. And then when that paper was produced, what did you do to improve it? What were the things that you changed? How did you put it in your own voice? How did you adjust it for the audience? These are process questions. And if you do those two things well, you'll get good writing. You'll get the end result. And then, of course, the last thing is, how did you test the veracity of the things that the AI claim? But AI hallucinations are quickly going to the wayside. So that, the fundamental thing we're going to, I think, see in pedagogy and teaching is a shift away from looking and assessing product to looking and assessing process. I'll give you an example from the software industry. I was talking to someone who heads up a cybersecurity team from a very well-known global networking company. You recognize the name. And he said when this was at a holiday party and ChatGPT had come out in November, they were already using it to write pretty complex programming. And a couple things were true. It wasn't great. The product wasn't great. And I said, well, why? What's going on? And he said, well, what we're discovering is that we're not great yet at prompting. We're figuring out we have to be better. We're learning how to be good prompters. And the other thing he said is there are programmers, contract programmers, who didn't get contracts. That's hundreds of hours of income a set of contractors did not get because they're now using AI. So that's the workplace displacement. And then he said when the AI would produce programming, they had to get really good at assessing it. So none of their guys are writing code anymore. Software engineers aren't going to write code, but they have to be really good at the process in order to get good product. So the cognitive bar actually goes up, not down. It's an interesting thing. And this is the work that all of us who are educators now need to start thinking through, what does it look like to teach someone to be a graphic designer today? What does it look like to be a videographer? SNHU has a small team of 5 people who do short-form videos as part of its SEO web strategy. These are just little 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute videos. Those 5 people prior to ChatGPT could do 20 a month. Today they do 150 a month. Same number of people, right? Productivity gain is enormous. So again, but they're mastering new skills and new tools, which everyone's going to be faced with.
Yeah. And here at the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, we have a small team, and we're utilizing AI in fun ways to do our own videos. And none of us have audio-visual backgrounds or graphic design backgrounds, and hopefully we're producing some pretty engaging stuff for people. Before I go to you, Dick, I want to bring in a question from Jeff Ritter in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who I hope you might know, because he did ask earlier if this is the real Paul or an AI-generated Paul. I can confirm that it is a real Paul.
Well, no.
Well, those people online may have questions, but again, we don't know what we're doing with creating AI stuff. So he wants to know how resistant to change will the major education structures be, colleges, public schools, and accreditors as well.
Very. And if there's a vision of how education changes, there'll be enormous backlash and resistance. And it's pretty powerful because these are regulated industries. So it's not the open market of journalism, which changed overnight, right? Regulated markets like healthcare and education don't change easily. And so even in a non-regulated market, what was the writer's strike about in Hollywood? A lot of it was about AI. A lot of it was about here, we can see the ways our jobs will change. So I think we'll see enormous backlash. Right now, so, the regulatory frameworks of governments will look quite different. So China is highly regulated for the good of the state, quote unquote, and they're creating an enormous surveillance state. Europe is actually, as is typical, pretty balanced. So if you post an AI image, it has to be labeled as such, for example. If you use AI in the generation of content, you have to label it. The US is its usual Wild West, and it's a little wilder even than normal right now. So there'll be kind of no holes barred, I think, in this country for quite a while. But yeah.
Oh, we are one of my favorite ways we're using AI, and we are not labeling it, but I freely tell people this is in our weekly emails. We have a riddle to start off about something global to drive people to look down all the way at the bottom and read through our whole email, and that is entirely AI generated. Similar to going from 20 videos a week to 150, I could not write a clever riddle in the 30 seconds it takes me now with ChatGPT.
Well, I will say on one last point about
Sure.
this, we will have AI disasters along the way, and that will drive regulatory initiatives. So if you think about railways, they started actually as part of mining. They were a way of getting coal up through the ground, and that's the initial railways in the ocean, right? And coal carts and so on. And in the US, we had a series of terrible railway disasters, and it's one of the reasons we now have normalized time zones. You could have a town 30 minutes away, but on a different time zone. Everyone was right? So trying to do train schedules was a source of disasters, and also standard gauge railways. So trains wouldn't, all of a sudden be on a railway gauge that wasn't the right one and run off the side. So these are things that we will definitely see that. We will see these things start to happen, and then you'll see regulatory responses to that.
Dick.
Thank you for having this, Paul. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Dick.
I have a difficulty coming down to just one question. So what I think I'll do is I'll leave 3 ideas with you. One positive, one negative, and one neutral, and just let you respond. First and foremost, the population of our planet is decreasing. So AI will fill all the jobs that we're going to lose to people's choosing not to procreate. And I think that's one way that AI can become useful. Secondly, you've convinced me tonight that I need to go out and start using it, because one of the problems with AI is that AI is going to get smarter than its users, and we're not going to be able to keep up. I just know that for a fact, and so I want to get your response to how we deal with that. I agree with you that we are in a time of change. In the past, and it's a 20 to 40-year cycle. In the past, we've gotten through these difficult periods with world wars, with health catastrophes like the Spanish flu. These have been cataclysmic events that has forced us to work together to figure out how to problem solve. That's something that I don't know, can AI focus us on problem solving so that we catch the cataclysmic event before it happens. And then lastly, you mentioned Clay Christensen, a great friend of mine. His way of thinking, he factors in the innovation through disruption. And I'm using a book of his, The Prosperity Paradox, as a way to work in the emerging economies. But I also put him in the same boat as Bjorn Lomborg and Hans Rosling. And these are people who I think have a very positive way of figuring out how we're going to use all this information to solve our problems in the future. So have at it.
Okay, good. Go through your 3 again. So, I don't even know if you know this, Dick, but Clay was on our board for 9 years, and trustee emeritus is a dear friend of 40 years. Yeah, he's a great guy. So, even Carlotta Perez, for all her dark talk about the transition and how bad it is, always believes you come into a golden age. So she would hear you and say, yep, it's going to be pretty painful getting there, and it was previously. But historically, the world gets a lot better, and we now have incredibly powerful tool that could make the world a lot better. So I tend to be, in the end, for all the ways I suspect we will get this wrong, because we're humans, and a reminder that no technology in humankind has never not been weaponized. ways. So we will see, we're already seeing AI being used in that way. That said, I do have a lot of high hopes for what comes. Highly recommend a book by James Bridle called Ways of Being. He's a philosopher and technologist. To your question about this technology is going to get smarter than us, and it will in all kinds of knowledge fields, but not all fields and not all ways of being. And I think understanding that and separating that, so the things that humans are good at are almost impossible to do algorithmically. You can treat it a little bit like a smoke and mirror show. So if you're talking to Maya, that voice agent, it sounds like empathy, but it's not. It's just mirroring you. It's not genuine. It doesn't know what to do with that empathy. So I think getting back to the things we celebrate most about human beings when they're best is actually how we have to think about, it's going to be smarter than us in certain fields, like medicine, but not in the things that actually matter most. David Autor, who's a labor economist at MIT, actually has a pretty positive view of what the future of work will look like. So he thinks, for example, that probably not great if you're a doctor, because if you think about what doctors do, it's the thing that AI is really, really good at, which is prediction. So when you come in presenting symptoms, the diagnosis is a prediction. This is what I think, this is what I predict you have, and now I'm going to order the test. That's a form of prediction. I'm going to order the test to confirm it. And then the prognosis is a prediction. This is how I think this is going to play out given your situation. And then the treatment plan is a prediction of what will work best. And already AI is proving itself to be better than physicians at every one of those stages. And interestingly, there's a research that now, so people say, okay, I could, like that's good, but I just want my doctor to look at what it's saying. And there's some research that suggests when you put a doctor in it, it actually degrades the results. Right, because doctors at their best have seen, what, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 patients? The AI is trained on millions and millions of patients. So you get all the problems with that. But David Autor says, on the other hand, you could take an individual nurse in a small rural town in New Hampshire who has foundational skills. That is, she knows how to fix a broken leg, she can put a PICC line in, she can do the physical things that our physical bodies still require. She has emotional intelligence and human skills that we often wish our doctors had more of. We often like our nurses better than our doctors. And now at her side, she has the best medical expertise in the world available to her. And to the extent that we'll use more wearables and other devices, that intelligence, that expertise, which is very expensive, very hard to build, it takes a long time to get someone there, is now available to any nurse. We can improve healthcare across the country by flooding the US with nurses who are well-trained. Those are good middle-class jobs. Those are jobs that actually start at $130,000 a year on average. Like the middle class could. So we're gonna see these shifts that we talk about. And the place to go back to your smarter than us question is, in certain knowledge fields, it is already the case that AI is better than us. So how do we harness that as our super cognitive extension of ourselves and our companion? And I think that's the challenge that we're trying to sort out. Yeah, and then the possibilities become endless.
So Art and Mary Hunt from Raymond are asking, what should our expectations be for work in an AI-enabled environment? Do we just take advantage of efficiencies, or do our jobs change in some really creative ways?
So jobs definitely change. Like even if you are more moderate than I am in your view of workforce, you have to believe that everyone's learning new skills. Everyone is, like if you haven't played with, I don't know anyone here who routinely is like looking and doing research, but take a look at Gemini, which is Google's AI. Check out Gemini Deep Research. So if you just search on Google Gemini, you go to their page, you'll see a little arrow on the top left. You can drop down to the various versions, do deep research, and then give it a pretty complicated research question. It's probably the thing that I've been most blown away by in 2 years. Like it does in 20 minutes what a graduate level researcher might take weeks to do. It's crazy. And I gave it a pretty complicated set of questions with a lot of data gathering and so on. And what it will do is what a great research assistant would do is it will come back to you and say, this is how I'm framing the problem, and here's how I'm structuring my inquiry. Does this look right? So if you were, again, had a researcher, you might say, I want to emphasize this less, and I forgot to put this in, and you change it, and you give it the go-ahead. And then it does an initial query and says, okay, now I think I'm understanding the problem. This is my understanding. Here are all my sources that I'm looking at. So you see exactly, you can see it. So it's unpacking its reasoning. It's not black box AI. It's actually showing you how it's thinking through. And then when it gets through that part, you say, yep, this is exactly what I'm looking for. You go and walk away for 15 or 20 minutes and come back and get an impeccably researched report, a 20-page, however you decide however long you can tell it. I don't want more than 30 pages, 20 pages, 10 pages. It's phenomenal. But think about what that allows you to do as an individual who's doing work, who's a researcher, writing books, thinking about complex problems. You're now superpowered. You now have this cognitive assistant at your side that's the best research assistant you've ever hired for practically free. Yeah, so it's exciting to think about what's possible.
Yeah.
So to go back to the jobs, I know it's really popular to say you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI. There are a lot of people going to lose their jobs to AI. Like, I just, like, why dance around that fact? Because what we should be doing, if you believe that, is having a national discussion, a policy discussion about the future of workforce and labor, which is very hard to do in our current climate. But that's the discussion we should be having. And then the question becomes what jobs emerge and what jobs stick around but change. And I think it will be an exceedingly rare job that doesn't have an AI component. So if nothing else, you should learn the tools. Joan, you're in a dance? I think you'll see choreographers using AI. Probably already.
Yeah, just wait for the microphone. Sorry, Neil. We'll get to you next, Neil. I promise.
So Paul, thank you very much for being here. So I am a dancer, and I am thinking through this whole thing. Where is the word body? I just haven't heard anyone mention body. But what I'm hoping is there will be time for us. We have become an increasingly more disembodied culture. We sit. Children are growing extra, larger vertebrae in their neck from being bent over. And you know what happened during COVID, learning online, depleted emotional and physical intelligence, because we know in relationship with other bodies what we can't even articulate. So I'm trying to be optimistic and think this is going to free up our physical presence, our ways of relating, our physicality, and that deep, deep knowledge that recognizes a soul in somebody.
Yeah, I share your hope and wish. The reality is if we are freed from our computers and free from our desk, which is what a lot of information age jobs look like, those jobs that I hope are really the ones that engage us in the community and with each other and with people. And I remember teachers, social workers, infrastructure jobs. A lot of people who actually like working out in the world and building things and seeing the result, right? Because if it's not that, then it looks like Wall-E, if you remember that movie, right? Where, so yeah, I share your hope and your wish on this front.
Neil.
Yeah, you already touched on it. You already touched on it a little bit. I have less concerns about AI than I do about the displacement of workers and the training and retraining of students and the young workers coming up. I have a real concern about that.
I wholly agree with you. That's why I think we need to be having a labor policy discussion. It's the one we didn't have around things like NAFTA and global trade, and we did a half-hearted notion that we were going to somehow, train coal miners and truck drivers to do other things, and that never succeeded. It's been, generally speaking, billions of dollars that poured into workforce investment boards that were really very poor results. And look at I'm not a fan of UBI. No one's asked about UBI, Universal Basic Income. I think that's just enough money not to revolt, but it doesn't make for a happy, flourishing life. I think human beings like to work. Stuart Russell, who's the very famous Berkeley computer scientist, has a series of AI lectures on BBC. Highly recommend them. They're called the REITH lectures, R-E-I-T-H. He talks about, if we look historically, when humans don't have enough work, not usually good. Not a good thing, generally speaking. So we want to put people to work. And Jamie Marasotis and I, Jamie's the head of the Lumina Foundation, and I wrote about this in my book, Broken, in 22, talked about what if instead of thinking about UBI, we were thinking about guaranteed human work, where we paid a living wage, a better than living wage to people in jobs that actually make the community better. And you say, again, how do you pay for these jobs? Bill Gates would say, tax the robots. There's no reason that a company that has automated all their white-collar jobs with AI shouldn't still, right? Because there's a possibility of windfall profits. Tax it. Move those dollars, right? And the reality is if we poured money into paying K-12 teachers and rebuilding our K-12 system, you'd be paying a lot less for prisons in America, right? Like, we just have to think more structurally and longer term. And again, I keep evoking Carla, but she would say, is like, the kinds of things you're talking about, this redistribution and rethinking of tax policy and wealth, that inevitably has to happen. Like, that's what happens. Wealth moves differently than it does, right? And right now we have some of the grossest wealth inequity we've had since the Gilded Age in the US. So I think you're asking the right question. And when you think about like reinventing, I said government has to get reinvented for the world in which you enter. Not my idea, Jamie's idea is like, we should meld the Department of Ed and the Department of Labor. Call it the Department of Talent. Like, let's have the conversation that recognizes that these two things are intertwined. And we want education to do a lot of other things than prepare people for jobs. But for the future, the jobs we're talking about are actually human things. Like, let's get back to the things that we think are important. Let's teach kids empathy, for example.
I have a question jumping off from that on gender inequality. How do you see AI affecting that, considering many of the caring economy positions you mentioned, social work, teaching, nursing, tend to be very high majority female positions?
And guess what? We pay them less and we give them less status, right? This happens in every field where women are the dominant workers. So there's equity questions more generally. So, you know, the biases of AI have been pretty well established because of the nature of the training models. There are attempts, I think, to finally get at that. For example, Latimer AI is one that trains on Black and Indigenous sources of knowledge, you know, Harlem newspapers, like they just broaden the training data than the sort of the ones that dominate our imagination right now. In terms of, and I want to make sure I'm tracking your question, is it will AI exacerbate the gender inequities of the future?
I mean, it's sort of an impossible question to answer for you.
Yeah.
I just was wondering if, yes, if, I know you talked a little bit about UBI and income, but like you said, when females become the majority of a profession, it tends to have lower.
So it'll be interesting what happens when men have to move into care economy jobs because the knowledge jobs that they have long inhabited just aren't there. Like finance? I mean, I'm talking to folks on companies on Wall Street, M&A companies and companies that do IPOs that are using AI now for 80% of the work that they used to farm down to associates, right? You're already seeing, like you won't see big announcements about this, what you'll see is a softening of the job market. All of a sudden there'd just be less hiring at JP Morgan for whole fields of job, and that's already happening. Talk to anyone who's a senior in college right now looking at the job market, it's a little grim. So I don't know what happens when men come back into the field. Does the wages go up for everybody? That you know, lifts all boats? I don't know.
Bill.
I think we've been moving towards my question anyway, which may not be very co-aided at the moment. But I was wondering, you know, you made early on the argument that really was presaged many, many years ago, back in the early 70s by Joseph Weizenbaum, when, you know, people started using his little toy program, Eliza, and you know, he said his secretary booted him out of his office so she could talk to Eliza an hour a day. And other people were, you know, forecasting this was going to be great because rather than paying expensive therapists, you could just, you know, get on a computer and work your problems out. And he wrote a screed that was very much against that. He said, look, there are certain things you just don't want machines doing, and psychotherapy is one of them. So he was sort of presaging you in a large part. But I guess I wonder, in part, you know, the psychotherapy was long male-dominated and high-class problem, but Some of the things you pointed to, teaching and nursing, have long been female-dominated. And then I thought, well, hold it. Now, think about what happened in COVID when the so-called essential workers, who turned out to be among the lowest paid people in our society, and I was hoping at that point, oh, maybe we'll actually realize that the essential workers, being essential, really ought to get paid pretty decently, and it didn't happen. They're right back in the mud that they were before. And so I have some worries that the kind of flip that you're projecting, hoping, would occur, that when the other jobs start evaporating in finance, in engineering, in a lot of other fields like this that tend to be male-dominated, that there really will be. I mean, after all, when parents send their kids to college, they would be, many of them, at least at the hoity-toity colleges, would be disappointed if the kid says, I'm going to teach second grade.
Right
You're
now.
not going to become a lawyer?
Yeah,
You're
right
not
now.
going to become a doctor? And so maybe there will be such an unrest that things do flip, but I have to admit, I'm kind of skeptical.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're skeptical that that change is going to be easy, I would join you in your skepticism. I think, that's not going to happen easily. It's going to happen very painfully if it happens. But the alternative is what I think we don't want, right? Which is that we're going to see enormous reduction of workforce, so high levels of unemployment, which depresses wages, generally speaking. Jobs that used to be reliable go away. Like, I thought accountant was a safe thing to be. Now it's not a safe thing anymore. I've lost my job. If we have that, and you have a small percentage of people in the U.S. who are working using AI, making a lot of money, doing really, really well, and a mass of people who are struggling, that is when you see revolutions, governments overturn. Remember last year in Democratic elections around the globe, every single incumbent government lost, whether they were right or left, except for two, Mexico and South Korea, and then South Korea flipped a couple of months later. So let's just say Mexico. Every other government fell. So globally, people are already angry. Globally, people are fed up. I think a lot of what led to the election of Donald Trump was, whether you like the solutions he has, he's not bad at citing the anger and the aggrievement and the problems that people feel are at work in the world. So I think we're already in the process. Carla Perez would say we're in the middle of the process. Like, just look at it historically. You're in the middle of it right now. Like, why do you think that's what this mess is? So if the question is, are we really going to pay teachers more money, et cetera? It's like, we may have no choice, and it may be what our society demands.
So I want to end with just one thing. In many of the interviews you've given and writings that you've done, you mentioned that we tend to underestimate change over 2 years, or overestimate change in 2 years and underestimate 10 years worth of change.
Right.
So understanding that, what do you think the next few years bring in terms of change to higher education? Is this a process that has already started, we're in the middle of it, or are we just at the early stages?
Well, I mean, you can't have that question without saying we are in the most extraordinary time facing higher ed in its history in America. It's under full-blown assault. Higher ed's made it easy for its attackers, to be honest with you. So there are lots of things we as an industry have not done well or we've gotten wrong, but we've never seen an attack on higher education like the one that's underway right now. Everything from our research dollars to our tax on academic freedom to DEIs being used as an air cover to get at a lot of grievances in this administration. So we've got to get through this period, like the country has to get through this period. And so there's that. But imagine that the election had turned out otherwise and that higher ed was sort of humming along in the way it was just 12 months ago. then your question, I think, becomes more reasonable, right? Because right now, the presidents I know no one knows how to operate right now. I'm grateful that Harvard finally mustered some courage to fight back, and it looks like there's now a growing sort of movement, but it's a hard one. And we've got a Secretary of Education who, conference I attended a couple of weeks ago, continued to talk about A1 and its impact on the future of learning. Not able to muster AI. The incompetence is startling. But to go to your larger question of, so what happens in the next 5 years? You got a demographic cliff. So you have far fewer 18-year-olds coming out of high schools. That's already being felt. It's about to get worse in the next year. So you will see, colleges are very hard to kill. So the publics especially are hard to kill because there's always local politicians who keep them alive, but they will be shadows of their best selves, right? Deferred maintenance will grow, class sizes will grow, programs will be cut, there'll be a lot of unhappiness, people won't get raises, so on and so on and so on. The elites continue to draw record numbers, so that sense of a Darwinian society, so I'm desperate to get my kid into the place that gives them the best shot, so we've never seen admissions numbers like that. We're seeing at Michigan, at Harvard, at UCLA. UCLA is now the most applied to university in the country with an acceptance rate lower than Harvard's. So extraordinary times in terms of enrollment. Families don't trust the ROI. It's not a phrase we have heard forever before, but now we talk about ROI, and they can't afford it. So it's out of the reach of too many. People are looking for alternatives. 55% of Google searches monthly for post-secondary are for people looking for non-degree options. So they're saying, I can't afford it, I don't have the luxury of 2 and 4 years. What is out there? What can I do post-high school that will get me a good job? And what they're looking for are 4 things. They want it to be affordable, they want it to be shorter, they want it laser focused on skills, so they're thinking skills, not fields of study, and they want those skills linked to a high demand job. It's absolutely clear, the research is clear, and so on. So we will see some universities adjust and grow. SNHU continues to grow. It had record enrollments this year because I think it's really keyed into a particular profile of adult learner, typically 32 years old, a couple of kids, full-time job, not making enough money. Places like Western Governors do a good job adjusting. You know, competency-based programs, $6,000 a year, very, very affordable. They're almost as big as SNHU, the 2 biggest universities in the country now, about 250,000 students each. You'll probably see the rise of mega universities. People have argued that for a while. So there'll be a handful of national dominant universities like this one and WGU and maybe ASU and a few others. But then you'll see a rash of new providers, I think, come as well. And I tell my colleagues all the time, they worry about being displaced by their traditional long-standing competition. What our friend Clay would say, you'll be displaced by the competition you never saw coming. You'll be displaced by the technology that you look down your nose at. So the reality is, so much of nonprofit higher ed looked down its nose at online, and that gave us the runway to grow an enormously successful university, financially, numbers, otherwise. I think a lot of places are going to try to hold AI off, and then there will be providers who use AI to come forward with incredibly powerful learning experiences that are more affordable, that work better for families and students and so on. So, you know, Ken Olson was famous when he was head of Digital Equipment Corporation for saying no one's ever going to want a computer on their desktop. And he didn't see the competition coming. And that company was the Apple or Google of its day. You know, ostensibly unassailable, and it was disrupted. And there are lots of examples of that. So I think, you know, we will see fewer traditional residential universities because we just don't have enough numbers to support it. And then we'll see a lot of new providers in the landscape. Universities won't go away. They're incredibly resilient, they're hard to kill. But the landscape of what learning looks like will be much more diverse, richer, people have more options, more affordability, and so on.
Well, thank you for ending us on what sounds like a positive note.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
More choices, more affordability,
exactly.
more quality, it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined us here tonight, whether in person or online. We had a great conversation. As I mentioned earlier, our next in this series will be on May 29th. You can check it out on the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire website. We are going to be talking with Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Kinney of the Belfair Center about AI, defense, ethics, and global security. So I hope you'll join us for that in person or online, and thank you so much for your support and your interest. Have a great night.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How you doing?